It now gives me pleasure to introduce someone I've known for almost 38, if not 39 years, my youngest son, Andrew Stein. Andrew was involved for 13 years in helping organizations and individuals transform themselves. And he's facilitated workshops in person. He's a graduate from Brown with a BA, an MBA from Emory. He's a chief operating officer and chief learning officer of One Unit, a hospital teamwork learning company. And I've asked Andrew if he would speak a little bit about long distance, remote learning, remote instruction, what he sees, what he can bring in terms of his understanding from the business world that we might be able to apply to the Jewish world and to the Jewish communal organizations. It's a real pleasure to introduce Andrew.
I recognize we've all been sitting here for about 45 minutes, so let's do a little bit of a stretch. I invite you to stand up wherever you are, and I'll do that too. I'm wearing shorts because that's what you have to do on Zoom call, long sleeve and shorts. And just give it a stretch, move around, whatever it takes. We're all doing it. Jog in place a little bit. All right, good. Get the blood going. My background is actually the business world. So most recently at Deloitte Consulting, I was there for 6 years. I design and deliver workshops and offsites. So it's adults, it's a strategy session for a bunch of grown-ups, but it's very similar principles to adult learning. It's all the same things. It's how do you make something into an active experience? How do you help people learn things without them realizing that they're learning a lot? How do you get them engaged? Managing adults in a giant room, 20, 30, 40 adults and keeping them engaged for a whole day is. So you're all here because you care deeply about Israel education or Jews learning from other Jews, or just ultimately about the Jewish people. And this is our home field advantage, right? We're Jews, so education is kind of the thing that we do, the thing that we've been doing for a long time, teaching each other. But this is also like a home field advantage. We now have to go play somewhere else, maybe in Orlando with a bunch of other soccer teams or something. The metaphor is we're in a new environment here. What are some ways to think about remote learning? When you think about designing and delivering a remote learning experience, not just teaching, but like the experience that someone has of learning that you are creating for them, what are some things that tend to work pretty well? So that's the question I'll ask. And to sort of kick us off, I kind of want to know from the group what you're all thinking. So we're going to do a Zoom chat question. The question in front of you is, what's your biggest question or anxiety about designing and delivering remote learning experiences? What's your biggest question or anxiety? I'd say about 4 themes came through that I saw. Number 1 is community, how to create community and sustain it and the relationships between people. Number 2 is engagement, how to make sure people are engaged. Number 3, very related to that, is focus and attention, how to keep people focused. And number 4 is the technology, of course. Some people feel like the technology is not really working for them, or some people know that their participants are having technology issues. So we'll talk about that as well. I won't really get into community, but I do think that if you basically are more entertaining, if you turn up the entertainment knob all the way to 10, then that tends to create engagement and community. And then if you create experiences for people to interact with each other, that creates community as well. So I think community is not necessarily a thing you go after, but if you're doing some of the other things that make learning work, community is something you'll end up getting out of it. So this is the slide we're going to be on for a while. There's a lot of words on it. Don't worry too much about all of that. These are the things I'm going to go through in the next probably 20 minutes. And I'm going to give you a lot. Usually in education, you're supposed to kind of focus on depth over breadth in order to make sure things stick. I'm going to break that rule. I'm going to go breadth. I'm going to go wide. I'm going to talk about a lot of different stuff really fast. And so take notes. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of beginner's mind. And this is the whole idea of starting from first principles. My assumption here is you are moving your learning, the experiences you create from an in-person world to at least a partially virtual world. At one point when you had to probably walk into a classroom for the first time, you had to ask yourself, what is this? What am I doing here? What is teaching? What does it mean to learn? And you are optimizing for the learner. And sometimes as educators, we can get away from that. So the first thing I would just remind you is kind of the most obvious truth in the world is to optimize for the learner, not the instructor. And that's something we can all work on. No matter how good you are, you can always be doing something more to optimize for the learner, not for the instructor? How do you make this learner-centered, not teacher-centered? So think about where the learners are, where your participants are coming in at, and what will make it good for them. And that could mean a clear email or explanation about making sure that people who need help with Zoom get help with Zoom, hand-holding where it's needed, whatever it is. Think about that learner journey all the way along. So my first challenge to you is really think about the learner journey and how to optimize for the learner. Number 2 is I'll talk about flipping the classroom. You probably have heard about flipping the classroom. If you haven't, I'll define it very quickly. A very traditional classroom is you come into a lecture and the sage on the stage is talking to you and telling you things, and the thoughts in their head go into your ears and they go onto your notebook, and that's how you learn. And then you go home and you do homework, and that homework is to practice the concepts you learned in class. Flipping the classroom is the opposite of that. It's saying that maybe the best way to deliver content is not with a lecture of someone talking to you, but it's people watching a video ahead of time. If you're not doing this already, I think you absolutely should. You assign the video ahead of time. People go watch the video. It's 5 minutes, it's 15 minutes, whatever makes sense. They can watch it as many times as they want. They can pause it in the middle and take notes on it, whatever. There's no rush. They're getting the concepts at their speed. And then when they come into the classroom or the virtual classroom, you are using that time for things you couldn't otherwise do. Doing homework on concepts you don't really know is kind of dumb, because if you get stuck, you get stuck. That doesn't really work. Do the video first, and then in classroom, use the class time for things you couldn't have done otherwise. I'll show you an example of that in a second. So that's what flipping the classroom is. It's basically this principle: don't waste precious live instructor-led time with content that can be consumed ahead of time. If you're delivering content that could have been consumed ahead of time in a video, you're not being as efficient as you could be. So send that video ahead of time. I wrote on here, YouTube, use it. You may still have the conception of YouTube as this place where there's bloggers and there's dumb videos of cats or whatever. If that's still your impression, drop it. YouTube has everything. 9% guarantee you'll find a video on there that is relevant to the content that you're trying to deliver. And if it's not there, you should definitely create it, because you just found a niche, and that needs to exist in the world, or find someone in your network who can create it for you. Think of YouTube as actually kind of a brilliant hack. It's going to save you time. Go watch 10 videos about your topic, whatever you're going to be talking about, and find the best 1 or 2 and know them really well, and then get people to watch that before they walk into the training, into the webinar, whatever. We're going to move on to your new VLT superpower. So VILT, what it actually means is virtual instructor-led training. So that's the term of art for what we're doing right now. Live instructor-led training, ILT, is a lecture in a classroom. VILT is a Zoom call. So it's the same thing. But VILT gives you new superpowers. And what I mean by that is you are in a new body now. If you woke up tomorrow and you had just a different body, a different gender perhaps, you'd have to figure out a few things. What is this body good at? What is this body bad at? Oh, look, I'm allergic to peanuts. I guess I need to design my life now around not eating peanuts accidentally. I never had to do it before, but now I do. You would adapt to that. I want you to think about this. You are now in a new body, and you've already been adapting for a while, right? We've got a few months of this, but really think about everything is new to you right now. So what is now possible that wasn't possible? That is the question that's always asked of technology. And why technology is so interesting to study is because it makes new things possible that were not possible before. And I'm going to show you one of those in a second. We're going to do a breakout session. So here's what's going to happen. We've got a group of 73 participants. If we're in a lecture hall right now, and we have 73 people, and I wanted there to be 36 pairs of people to go off into separate rooms, into 36 separate rooms, and have a conversation. And then I could snap my fingers and bring them all back into the lecture hall. I could not do that. I could have them turn to each other and talk a little bit. Okay, sure. But that is not a thing I can do. I can do that on Zoom. And that is a very cool thing. So I'm going to show you what that is. In a second, you're going to go into a breakout room and you're going to have one other person there. So why am I doing one other person? Because then you can't hide. You can't fall into the background and pretend not to engage. You're going to talk to that person and they're going to talk to you. The question I want you to ask each other is, what are you doing today that's working for you in terms of remote learning? And what's hard? Just ask them that question and let them ask you that question. You're going to get about a minute each. So it's really, really concise. And in about 2 minutes, there's going to be a timer. The timer is going to go on. It's going to count down from 60 seconds. At the end of those 60 seconds, you're going to be grabbed back into this Zoom call, and we'll keep going. But I just want you to experience that if you've never done a breakout room like this. All right, I think we've got everyone back. The experience you probably had was you were in a breakout room. This is the other person. You get to talk to them. You ask them a question. They ask you. And maybe you create a connection, right? That was a connection you otherwise wouldn't have. And how many Zoom calls do we go to, especially with a lot of people, where you really never even talk to anyone? So you can do that for 1 minute. You can do larger groups. But I really encourage you to enjoy the breakout room feature of Zoom. If it's not something that currently shows up when you host a Zoom call, you can actually go into your Zoom settings. And it's kind of buried deep in there. And you can actually activate it. And that will allow you to do breakout rooms. I would do it every session. Find a reason. Just find something for people to ask each other. Create that interactivity, something you can't do in any other way. That's a superpower. So related to this is this idea of from passive learning to active learning. It says, how can you make people do stuff? I started the session by offering a chat question. I got you to type. Suddenly, this is interactive, right? I was silent. I didn't have to do anything. This is great as a learner. I don't have to do stuff at this moment. And then you guys type stuff in. I do want to mention one thing because we're talking about Zoom. Zoom will end up being a minority of the learning. If you were running a college course, 70% of the learning would be happening on the platform, on whatever it is, like Blackboard or whatever the software is that students go to submit papers and download readings and all that, and talk to each other in a discussion forum. And then 30% would happen on Zoom. So actually, a lot more learning happens through the platform, and then Zoom is this like supplemental thing. The last bullet point here, there's this idea that like we've seen this in massive open online courses. There's probably someone who's like the best physics teacher in the world. If I'm a student of physics, do I want to walk to a lecture and listen to the local expert? Or do I want a lecture from the best guy in the world or the best woman in the world? I kind of want the best lecture. And so one of the predictions that I think is going to be borne out in the next 10, 15 years, maybe even sooner than that, is that many, at least introductory courses, will be going after the top lecturers. You already see this in terms of music, right? Why would you buy a piano concerto of Bach from the third best pianist in the world if you get the first best? There's no cost to duplicate this for 100 people versus 1,000 people versus 1,000,000 people. So why not go for the best person in the world? It's obviously not a liquid market. It's not that easy. But one extreme of learning is that you have the world's best lecturer delivering content, and then you have guided interactivity. And so all of us as educators, our world is going to be slowly moving and sometimes faster moving to a world where our job is not actually to be the content expert. Our job is to be a facilitator, a guide, and to bring students through an experience that uses the content that someone else is bringing to bear because they're really good at delivering that content. That goes back to YouTube. You don't have to be the content expert. That's a great thing. But the one thing that we can't duplicate very well is facilitation, is guiding. And so I would absolutely study that, practice it, talk to people who are good facilitators, and learn how to, always be strengthening that muscle because that's something that can't be copied. The next topic I want to talk about is this idea of learning as memory. This is almost kind of obvious, but like we never really think about this. When we talk about learning, what we're really talking about is memory. Think back to college. Think back to a course you took that you don't remember anything from. You spent hundreds of hours on, let's say, chemistry or biology or whatever it was, and you don't remember a thing from it. For me, it was like electricity, magnetism. I took a course on that and I got nothing. I did well in that course or good enough, but like, I don't remember it. Now I haven't used it since then. That's kind of a waste of time. When I think back on it, a waste of money and time. I could have done something more valuable, or maybe the teacher could have been better. So at the end of the day, we're trying to create long-term memory. One thing I encourage you to do is be a student of long-term memory. If you're not already, go read books about how people remember. I'll talk about a couple of those principles. One is brevity, levity, repetition. Like this is basic presentation skills. Brevity, levity, repetition. Brevity, keep it brief. Levity, make it fun. Repetition, hammer your point home again and again. You've probably heard this before. We've all been trained in presentation, but at the end of the day, you remember that you're going after memory. I wrote here, embrace the silly and the surprise. Silliness is fun. Surprise is fun. It was a little silly when I got you all to stand up at the beginning of this call to stretch. But, I think that helped. Surprise. Like some of the best physics teachers, they do crazy, weird experiments in front of the class. But why? Because you remember it. So think of ways to bring some silliness and some surprise and some fun and some levity into what you do. People will remember it and they'll appreciate it. The other memory piece I want to think about is this idea of location. In a way that you may not appreciate, we are really wired to remember things based on location. You can probably picture your childhood bedroom and remember where everything is in that bedroom. That is kind of nuts. People who have really good memory, for instance, if you give one of these guys or women a 52 card deck that's shuffled, They can memorize the order of the cards. How do they do that? Usually they're using location-based tricks. They're imagining like a house, and inside the house are things, and each thing has an item and attaches to that card. And they literally, to remember the deck, they walk through the house in their mind. I want to remind us all that location is actually really tied to memory. And so when we're talking about tours of Israel, for instance, that is so powerful in a way that you may not appreciate. One tool that I love is Google Earth. Google Earth is extremely good. If you haven't explored it lately, I encourage you to. It's literally earth.google.com. You can just pull up a map. You can screen share it. You can zoom in, zoom out to places. And I'll show you how much fun this is. So this, at the very least, this could be an icebreaker, right? I've got 5 people in my class. I want them each to introduce themselves and to talk about what synagogue they're from. So I'm going to write the Temple, Atlanta, Georgia. I'm going to zoom us there. And this is fun, right? If Peter were going to talk about his congregation, what if we had up on the screen while he's talking a little share of the temple? There it is. There's the iconic dome and the building and everything. And we could do a street view and go down to the street level and see it. But the reason this works is because we have memory, because location helps us memory. So I encourage you to use location, find ways to do it, and Google Earth is one way to design experiences. So there's a principle of learning, checklists, examples, and feedback. Imagine you're teaching a skill that someone had to replicate. Like, what would that skill be? If that skill is learning how to deconstruct a parsha, or that skill is being able to argue for Israel's existence, that is a skill. And you want someone to be able to take from your session and carry forward. Well, how would you practice a skill? Well, if you're practicing a skill in the kitchen, you'd probably do it a bunch of times. You'd watch a YouTube video of someone doing it. You'd have someone else watch you do it. You'd watch an example of it. You could try to get feedback on it. So checklists, examples, and feedback are how you do skills. I want you to ask yourself to think about the skill that you're teaching. That skill could be they are able to explain X, Y, Z to someone. That's a great skill. But think about the skill you're teaching and break it down to a checklist, example, and feedback. So the checklist is literally, what do I do first, second, third? If I'm trying to argue for Israel's right to exist, what do I do first, second, third? Well, the first point I make is this. Second point I make is provide that checklist. Examples, show a video of someone doing that well. Feedback, get them to record a video and then give them feedback on how well they did it. Checklist, examples, and feedback. That is actually how you walk out of a training or a learning experience and you've got that skill. There's a very cool tool I'm not going to go show you right now called Flipgrid. Literally, I record a video prompt to you. I say, I want you to record a 2-minute video explaining the history of Israel and Zionism. All right. You go record a video. I can see all those videos. I can then amplify a couple of them that I think were best. And you all can go watch the ones that were best. And then you can go make another version of the video. That's an amazing learning experience. And I promised you, if someone were to go through that, they would come out with that skill. Maybe they were the best video, maybe they weren't, but then now they've gotten feedback on their video. They've gotten to practice it. That's what I mean by practicing skills. And you can do so virtually using something like Flipgrid, where people are responding with videos and can get feedback on it. Point number 7, this is pretty obvious, get better over time. But it's so easy in virtual settings to do a survey with Google Forms. If you're not familiar, Google Forms is a really easy way to just say, tell me what you thought of the training, what did you like, what you didn't like, what advice would you have? Every time you do a learning, I would absolutely be asking, what could have made this better? If you're not asking that, then you're not really getting better over time. And if you're not getting better over time, then why are you doing this? Every time I would be putting out a survey, Google Forms, make it super simple and capture that feedback. What would have made this better? That's all. That's the only question you have to ask. What would make this better? And a few more random tips about remote learning. I already told you that Zoom is just 30% of the learning, that using platforms and letting people kind of learn on their own is a lot more of it, especially in kind of traditional like college education, for instance. Laptops, not phones. What I mean by that is Zoom just works better on laptops. People try to use their phones or tablets. They have connectivity issues. They can't see the whole screen. I would always encourage you to encourage your learners to get onto their laptop. Millennials are great at the technology they use, like Snapchat or Instagram, but they're not necessarily better at all technology. So don't assume just because you have young people in your audience, they're going to master the technology. They need to be taught it just like anyone else. And then, students need those skills. So if I were to kind of emphasize one thing out of all this, it's virtual instructor-led training is a new thing. You've got new superpowers. You've got tools like Google Earth and Flipgrid and breakout rooms that let you do things that you just couldn't have done otherwise. So instead of just trying to copy paste what you did in a physical classroom into a virtual classroom, step it back, think about first principles, get back to the beginner's mind. What are you doing? How do I make the student centered? What is that experience? And how do I bring someone through an experience so they're developing a skill? They know exactly what that skill requires. They're seeing examples of that skill is good. They're getting feedback on that. They're remembering it because things are silly, they're surprised, there's location, it's funny, whatever. Well, that's how you design an amazing experience. And if you can do that virtually, you can do that in person, you can do it the other way. It translates really well. I'll stop there and go to the chat, which I've been looking at, and entertain questions or ask my fellow panelists if they want to add anything.
I'm happy to jump in and just agree with so much of what's happening here, especially with on the screen, knowing with firsthand experience now how much students and any participant appreciates those different medium that they shine when given those different opportunities. And I like how you said it in those last few minutes, that creating these moments, the breakout rooms in Zoom, the different opportunities for kids to speak. It's a lot of the same things that teachers try to do in the classroom with, I think, a whole lot more tools in their tool belt. It makes it exciting, but the biggest thing is the teachers, all of us need to not be afraid of it, need to not be afraid to jump in, and that not that there's a tool for every little thing, but if we are willing to be creative, that we absolutely can be with just thinking differently about the whole lesson.
It was an exceptional presentation. I think if there's anything I could do differently looking back, having time to prepare for the situation that we're in, it would be to master all the stuff that's on the slide on the page and to enable our teachers to be able to have the tools and the skills to do that. So we're doing it now and we're doing it slowly, but I think the secret sauce is that teachers have to be able to do this and do this well. And we're trying to double down now and catch up because like everyone, we didn't know this was coming.
It was fabulous. I want to emphasize the YouTube piece and the opportunity to create your own YouTube channels. They're really easy to do, and you don't have to make these 30-minute YouTube videos. They can be 90 seconds. They can be 5 minutes. But you can give these little bites for people to take advantage of, and it makes it much easier for them to watch a 90-second or 2-minute YouTube video than in an ongoing classroom setting have to do another one and another one. So it's a great suggestion with YouTube and to create your own.
And the CIE website is about the best website anywhere. I mean, the content on there is exceptional, and it's going to plug right into everything that you're doing. No one paid me to say that, but I would be remiss if I didn't point you there because everything's there.